Hi, my name is Michael Stohlgren, and today I'll be presenting on my MEM research, which consisted of looking into energy efficiency in the US rental market, then searching for opportunities for improvements. Now, if you'd asked me 2 years ago how I'd spend my time in this program, I could have never imagined how important this subject would become to me. Unfortunately, when I moved to Gunnison, I rented what I thought had to be the least efficient place on the planet. And between spending most of my time under a heated blanket and the rest wondering how I was going to come up with $500 for the utility bills, I began obsessively researching rental housing, only to find a systematic underinvestment into rentals that carry social, economic, and environmental detriments. So, in an attempt to inform myself and my fellow renting cohort, I began documenting this research, only to find an MEM project laying underneath. And what came out of it was two project components. The first part, and the bulk of my MEM work, was writing a review paper based on the research I had collected. The mission for this paper has remained the same since I started. I wanted to create a fact-based analysis that would help inform researchers, policymakers, and educators on the systematic neglect in rentals across the US. With the help of my advisor and project sponsor, I've recently finished this paper and submitted it for review at the Journal for American Planning Association. And the second part of my project, and what I'm planning to continue working on after this program, was creating a social enterprise startup called EcoStamp. EcoStamp is an energy performance certificate specific to rentals with the goal of integrating sustainable thinking into the rental market. So why have I decided to spend 2 years in a potential career focusing on rentals? Well, to start, rentals have an enormous and largely uncalculated environmental footprint. Residential homes, meaning rentals and owner-occupied combined, account for over 20% of the total greenhouse gas emissions in the US. Rentals make up a growing 37% of this market and 50% of the market in most US cities, meaning that they are a significant contributor. Furthermore, it's well documented that rentals are significantly less efficient than owner-occupied homes, meaning that if reducing carbon output is the housing sector's goal, and the housing sector is the goal, then focusing on rentals should be a top priority. And finally, while there is some research on rental efficiency coming out of the US and some major players, including Rocky Mountain Institute, focusing on the subject, something that struck me very early on was that the bulk of the literature on the topic was stemming from the European nations, many of which have far more advanced efficiency building codes than in the US. So a large part of my project became taking some of the lessons learned over in Europe and finding ways that they could be converted to fit the unique rental market in the US. So what makes up our unique rental market? Well, for one, following a stark decline in public housing options, close to 95% of the rentals in the US are now privately owned for-profit entities. The rental market is also unique in that specific demographics are far more likely to rent than others. People of color are twice as likely to rent than whites. Young people make up the overwhelming majority of renters, with 66% of people 30 years or younger renting, and 64% of renters fall into low-income brackets. So, by underinvesting into our rentals, we're directly underinvesting into our most vulnerable groups. Another interesting aspect of the rental market is that it's growing at an unprecedented rate, particularly in the younger renters who are renting longer into their lives than ever before. This is due in part to renting being cheaper than homeowning in most metropolitan markets. So for younger people who are moving to cities in search of jobs, renting is the obvious choice. But as this market grows, so does its environmental impact. And again, this is because rentals are systematically underinvested in, and this evidence has been very well documented. In Victoria, Australia, which is a similar privatized rental market, only 55% of rentals had insulation compared to 95% of owner-occupied homes. In the US, a study that used British thermal units per square foot to determine the efficiency of houses found that rentals were 29% less efficient than owner-occupied homes. And finally, again, the US, a study looking at inadequate homes, meaning an occupied home with moderate or severe physical problems, found that rentals were more than twice as likely than owner-occupied homes to fall into this category, with 9% of rentals being deemed inadequate housing. But what causes this underinvestment? Well, there are two barriers that researchers point to. The first being the problem of asymmetric information, which simply put, describes a scenario where the landlord is unlikely to invest into non-aesthetic upgrades, like insulating attic space, because renters are less likely to notice those additions compared to a fresh coat of paint. Landlords then are more likely to invest into aesthetic upgrades like paint that will attract renters, but will likely have no effect on the efficiency. This is a major barrier with few solutions because overcoming asymmetrical information will require consumers to think completely differently about how they approach their rental selection. However, there's an even greater barrier protecting the status quo, and that is the market failure of split incentives. And split incentives describes a scenario where neither the landlord nor the tenant directly benefit from investing into energy efficient upgrades. This is due to the landlord passing the utility payment responsibilities onto the tenant. When this happens, the landlord has no incentive to invest into energy efficient upgrades because they would not benefit from a lower utility bill, thus making it difficult for them to pay off their investments. Meanwhile, the tenant has no incentive to invest in efficiency upgrades because they do not own the rental, and their investment would only benefit the landlord in the long term. This scenario of split incentives directly affects 91% of renters who are responsible for paying their essential utility bills. And this is the greatest reason why rentals are underinvested in when compared to owner-occupied homes. So how do we fix this? First, let's look at potential policy adaptations. I mentioned Rocky Mountain Institute earlier, and that's because they're doing some really amazing things, creating policies towards minimum efficiency standards for cities. So far, 27 cities representing over 1 million rentals are working towards adopting the plan. Rocky Mountain Institute estimates that if all 27 cities implement the policy, the energy cost savings could amount to $560 million annually. Rocky Mountain Institute is focusing on cities because they have the greatest density of renters, with many of them reporting a greater number of renters than homeowners. Furthermore, cities are also unique in that many of them have created their own climate action plans in the wake of the US, withdrawing from the Paris Agreement. So with sustainability being their focus, adopting efficiency standards for rentals should be a top priority, up there with sustainable purchasing plans and recycling plans like Megan and Kyle have been working on. So far, Boulder, Colorado is the only city to implement the Rocky Mountain Institute policy design, but hopefully more will follow soon. And another potential solution and a more bottom-up approach would be integrating energy performance certificates, or EPCs, into the rental market. These certificates have already proven lucrative in many other industries. Just as the market shifted towards organic foods and grocery stores, green building options are shown to be more marketable and sought after. Energy performance certificates have helped play a huge role in this. An EPC is important because it summarizes a lot of information into a transparent and marketable brand. I'm sure many of us are familiar with LEED or Energy Star, and although we might not know how the Energy Star dishwasher is more efficient, we're able to trust that it is because of the Energy Star EPC branding. However, these EPCs haven't been integrated in the rental market at the same rate as the homeowner market. And this is the basis of a study that focuses specifically on comparing energy efficiency adoption rates and its impact on rental pricing in the US market. This study from the University of Iowa's Department of Economics looked at over 159,000 rental listings across 10 major US cities, singling out listings that identified any sort of efficiency upgrades, from installing LED light bulbs to replacing major appliances. The study found that rentals with those listings rented at 6 to 14% higher price than those without. Their conclusion was that while adoption rates were low across the US, there was a clear correlation between installing efficiency upgrades and benefiting from a higher premium. In the discussion, the authors wrote that EPCs, while more common in Europe, show great promise for the US rental market. And this brings me to the second part of the MEM project work. Being unable to find an effective EPC for the rental market, I went out and created my own, EcoStamp, an energy efficient certification for rentals. With EcoStamp, I'm hoping to leverage the idea of conscious consumerism to foster a market for sustainable rentals. I want to encourage landlords to invest into their rentals to make them more efficient to meet the growing demand for sustainable products. This is what I call a shared incentive. Tenants can find rentals that fit their environmental and psychographic demands, while landlords can benefit from adding value to the rentals and make it more desirable for prospecting renters. In conclusion, whether it's something like EcoStamp certification or Rocky Mountain Institute's policies, one thing is for certain: the underinvestment into rentals across the US needs to end if we're going to progress towards a less carbonized housing stock. And cities facing the fastest growing rental demographics need to be at the center for this push towards a more sustainable renting. Thank you very much.